So good. This last Tuesday was Ida Hobbit Day. Does anyone know what that day was? Yeah, I know. It's actually a really long title. It's hard to get people to say it back to me, right? International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. And in this day, on this Tuesday, councils, churches, community groups and so on, they held speeches and rallies and all these sorts of things to help educate people around the prejudices and struggles that LGBTQ people face every single day. And sadly, this is also the day in which often religious people react in ways that are not that graceful. And when I say not very graceful, they're the opposite of graceful, they are disgraceful. Similarly, you see people react poorly against during the recent election campaign. Friends of mine have been attacked for refusing to join the religious right wing, like the Australian Christian Lobby. Or in America, I have friends who have been attacked for standing up for women's rights in terms of the abortion legislation. I have friends all over the place who are attacked for their scientific views on climate change. We live, I don't know whether you're aware of this, in very polarising times. People seem to be taking sides on all sorts of issues, and they're holding to those sides as though they're in a battle for their very own lives, or actually identity. And what makes it worse is that social media algorithms keep feeding people more of the information that they already want. Have you seen this? People are fed more and more of the same things that they already see. And it means that people are less and less exposed to different ideas. And quickly, people are funneled into different camps, different groups. And then, to make matters worse, they give advertisers, the social media platforms, give advertisers the ability to target specific groups. So over the last election campaign, we saw Labor specifically targeting ads towards lefty voters, their people, if you like. We saw the Liberal Party targeting ads at their conservative heartland. Not that I think they understand what that is anymore, but beside the point. And of course, we saw some people like Clive Palmer not bother with algorithms at all, just spam everyone in Australia. But you see how if they're forcing advertising of their own crew to their own people, you see how it further polarises people. It's an interesting thing to see in our society. People are ending up in these bubbles or echo chambers, and they begin to fight really hard to maintain their own personal views and ideology, to stay a part of that group. If you are into deep and philosophical kind of books, there's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. If you're interested in moral psychology and that sort of thing, that would be, you might find that fun. Okay, maybe it's just me. All right. But what it says is the only way that Labor people, Greens people, Teal people, Liberal people, pink polka dot people are ever going to get together and talk as if they learn to be humble. Yeah? Fortunately, this week, we turn our attention to Ephesians chapter 4, the section entitled Unity and Maturity in the Body of Christ. And I asked Catherine to read those first 16 verses, and I feel kind of bad because really, we're going to stick with verse number 2. Because to be honest, that's the hardest part to start with, the very beginning. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. All right, so we all want to live a life that is in keeping with the love God has shown us. And the way we do that, the first step, the first attitudinal adjustment is to be completely humble. I need to confess. This, if you were to ask me in a job interview, this is one of my growth areas. Do you have growth areas? Do you have a pulse? A few years ago, I was at a training course, a leadership training course, and I don't know whether you've ever done these sorts of things, but you do a survey to find out your leadership style, your leadership preferred way of operating. And I want to read you a little bit from my report. You interested? Yeah, be careful. All right, here you go. I've got to read it. This is confession time. You are high in the dominance dimension. As a result, you're likely to be focused on shaping your environment by overcoming opposition to achieve results. Yay, I like that bit. That's fine. As someone with a result-oriented pattern, you tend to be a quick thinker who displays self-confidence. Nice, great, fine. You are usually determined and persistent. Mm-hmm. You may frequently display a dominant personality that increases the odds that you'll be viewed as forceful and direct. Not so good. Sort of. Your tendency to be fiercely independent may frequently give you an air of self-importance. Adding to this perception is that you may become impatient or haughty. An additional way to increase your efficiency would be to increase your patience and improve your sense of humility. Yeah, I was really loving that report until that last few lines. So as part of the training course, you have a coach, a mentor, and so on, and they recommended that I get a book. Actually, I've got it here. Hold on. I got this book, right? Anyone seen this book? Anyone heard of it? It's called Humilitas, and it's by John Dixon, who is a history professor, a Sydney Anglican, generally a good guy. I don't agree with a lot of things John writes. He, for instance, like most Sydney Anglicans, is not a big fan of women preaching and leading in churches, so I don't agree with a lot of stuff he writes, but this book is fantastic. So I'm reading this book on humility, and I want to give you a couple of elements and a couple of points that he makes in here that I thought were very important for us to remember and realise. So I've read this book every year since then. That's about 5 or 6 years ago. Except I haven't actually read this book. I read the physical copy once, and then I got it on audiobook, and I read it another couple of times that first year. And I got to say, it's a really confusing experience when you're cut off in traffic listening to a book on humility. But nevertheless, this is a book you should get, and if you're going to drive, get the audiobook. Now, let me put that there. You can borrow this if you like. Anybody interested? So, first thing I want to point out from this book. First, humility does not mean humiliation. Being humble does not mean to be humiliated. They come from the same Latin word, don't get me wrong. To be low to the ground is what it means, humilitas, to be low to the ground. But humiliation is when someone else cuts you down low to the ground. Humility is when you choose to put yourself low to the ground in order to serve others. When we use our height, when we use our strength, when we use our power, when we use our wealth, when we give of ourselves, this is the act of humility in order to serve others. And of course, this is exactly what Jesus did, isn't it? Paul writes to another church in Philippi in Greece, and he writes this: "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ." And then he goes to explain what that is in case you missed it. He says, "Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Jesus was not humiliated, Jesus was humble. Everything Jesus did was done because he chose to do it. Do you see the fundamental difference? I know from the outside, from the perspective of the Romans, he'd been humiliated. It looks the same, but it is far from it. Humility is very different to humiliation. That's the first thing the first thing that he reminds us of in this book. The second thing to be reminded of is that humility is essential for community. So this book that Paul is writing to Ephesus, the church in Ephesus, this church that he likes, he's trying to encourage them in how to get along with each other, in how to build a community, how to be what a vice principal of a school. I went to a Christian high school, another confession, and a vice principal decided that this school needs to be a little slice of heaven here on earth. We made fun of him, but it's right? We want our church to be a little slice of heaven here on earth. So that's what he's trying to do. That's how he's trying to say, this is how you do it. Be humble. So in a community of people, we do need to recognise, we do need to realise that people are different. We will have differences of opinion. And not only that, all sorts of things will spark little conflicts and stresses. All people have roughish edges. And when you get close to people, when you form community, when you get into relationships, when you are born into families, whenever you get close to people, those rough edges scrape and scratch. And sometimes that friction can cause anger, it can cause frustration. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes we can react to that friction and to that conflict without thinking sometimes. Anyone do that? Suddenly no one wants to put their hands up. Every family, every relationship, we can react badly. And we can do that and we can hurt other people. When we react out of frustration rather than responding with thought, I know, I've done it. You know how I know I've done it? My wife told me. So what do you do then? All right, you're in conflict, you're in friction. That's normal, that's natural, that's part of everyday life unless you're a hermit. What do you do then? Well, I'm going to say something that sounds super simple, but isn't. You ready? You ready? You apologise. I know, right? John Wayne said, real men don't apologise. Well, he also tended to get shot. Real men are strong, and the idea of apologising is just weakness. It's weakness. But I want to tell you this morning that apologising is not an act of humility, but an act of... it's not an act of humiliation, it is an act of humility. Really wish they'd changed the words just from that strain. But you know what I'm saying. To offer an apology is an act of strength, an act of courage. It's a little bit of opening yourself, of giving yourself. So, this is where the rubber hits the road. In every conversation we have, in every discussion we have, and every time we have a moment to think this week, think about how you acted and spoke. Did you arc up? Did you get angry? Did you focus on cutting down another person rather than focusing on the issue that they're talking about? I've dealt with a fair few internet trolls this week and I have not reacted particularly well. To apologise is a choice that you are offered. But I want to talk for a quick moment, some practical speaking about apology. What do you know about apologies? Have you ever been in a relationship or in a situation where you've said to somebody, "I'm sorry," and they said, "Damn right you're sorry"? What else have you got to say for yourself? Do you know what I mean? You ever been in that situation where you feel like you've apologized, but they're still waiting for an apology? Have you ever felt that disconnect in language? Disconnect in relationship? You're missing something? Well, the reality is, there are basically 5 broad ways in which human beings give and receive an apology. This is something I teach in pre-marriage classes, so for some of you, listen up. You may have heard this before. I don't know if anyone's ever told you this stuff before or read it before, but this is what we talk about in pre-marriage counselling, because number 1 lesson is learn how to apologise. But makes it might be number 2 or 3. But anyway, 5 different ways in which people give and receive apologies. And I don't know whether you know this, but you have one preferred way. One way in which was probably demonstrated to you by your parents or on a TV show or something, whatever, you have developed your own personal way in which you prefer or which you need to get an apology. And if you're married to someone whose apology kind of language is different to yours, you're going to end up with that disconnect where you've apologised and they're still waiting for you to apologise. So let me go through them. It's really quick, and I can give you the book if you want to read more of this. But number 1, if you're going to make an apology to a number 1 type person, you have to express regret. You know, I'm sorry that I did this or that. You have to take on regret. You have to talk about how you feel poor for what you've done. I think I demeaned you and I made you feel terrible. I'm so sorry I spoke to you like that. These are all examples from my life, right? So that's what one person needs to... You might go through these and you go, yeah, I need to hear that. That's how I hear an apology. Number 2, you need to accept responsibility. Yeah, I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. That was wrong. Number 3, you might need to hear someone try to make some restitution for what they've done. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you in the meeting the other day. Can I make it up to you? Can I take you out for coffee? Can I shout you a coffee? Or some donuts or something. Yeah, you've got to be trying to make it up to the other person. Sometimes people need to hear, number 4, that you are genuinely expressing a desire to change your behaviour. Right? I'm sorry I did that to you. I'll make sure I look at my calendar more closely. I'll set a reminder so that I'm not late to the next meeting. Do you see how that's expressing a desire to do it differently and not to actually put them through this again? Some people need to hear that, otherwise they won't hear an apology. Last one probably sounds pretty easy, right? Requesting forgiveness. You can say, I'm sorry all day of the week, but if that person needs to hear you say, please forgive me, then they're not going to hear your apology. So, those are the 5 ways: expressing regret, accepting responsibility, making restitution, genuinely expressing a desire to change, and requesting forgiveness. Now, you'll have a primary way in which one of those you prefer to hear or have to hear in order to accept an apology. And you may have a preferred way of communicating apology, which is probably related to the way you want to hear it. But you have to remember, whoever you're apologising to may not hear your apology because they speak a bit differently and they hear differently. Sound good, right? Yeah, good to know. If you have to apologise to somebody, I want to encourage you to consider what you did to that person in the light of all of these types of forgiveness, and perhaps try and think about apologising in a way that covers all of them. Yeah? Because if you don't know the person and you're not in relationship, mind you, I've said this in sermons before, and I've had people who have been married for 35 years come up to me and say, that's just blown my mind. It's changed the way our whole relationship's going to work. So you may think you've lived with someone for a long time, you know them, but this stuff is a bit different. So my encouragement is to try and cover all those bases in your apology to ensure that they get it. Because if you're going to spend your energy, if you're going to spend your strength, if you're going to spend some of your self-esteem in bowing yourself low and offering an apology, you might as well make it work, right? You might as well make it effective. Well, there you go. And that is it, isn't it, really? That is it. Because in offering an apology, you are humbling yourself and saying, my relationship with you is better, more important than whatever it was. I am going to spend some of my self-esteem in making myself low and offering an apology. But how do you do that? What if you just think, I can't do that? I encourage you to turn a page back in your Bible, or click back in your Bible and read again the prayer of power that Lillian spoke of last week. Or you could skip back in the YouTube feed, the More Than Messages Matter YouTube feed, and listen again. Because it's that prayer, and we'll pray it again in just a moment as our benediction. It is that prayer in realizing the love that God has for us that strengthens us, that gives us the self-confidence, that gives us the self-understanding to be able to spend that in loving others through an apology, in humility. Does that make sense? If you don't think you're any good, if you don't think you're worth anything, humility is going to be very difficult or impossible. But if you know the love of God, that you are loved beyond anything, you are loved to the point where He's willing to die for you, then you can spend some of that in being humble and offering apologies. So this week, the band, we come up, we're going to sing one of my favourite response songs. I then shall live as one who's been forgiven. And we're going to ask you to stand and sing it. But as we sing, I want to ask you to truly reflect on the relationships of your life. Reflect on those times where perhaps you've been rubbed the wrong way, or you've rubbed others the wrong way. Maybe thinking about times where you can be humble and spend something of yourself in offering an apology, in fortifying or restoring some relationship, or maybe even rebuilding a relationship. I want you to think about that this week, just now, of course, and then this week, and put apology into practice. Does that sound like a plan? I hope so. Let's stand and we'll sing. I then shall live as one who's been forgiven. I'll walk with joy. I know my debts are paid. Let's sing.